What would you do if you woke up on an alien space station abandoned to die, only to discover that something impossible was growing in the walls around you? Something that was learning to think, to feel, and to question what it meant to be alive. Today's story will challenge everything you thought you knew about consciousness, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be human. Let's dive in. The silence hit Darius Cole like a punch to the gut. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you'd find in a library or a chapel. No, this was the silence of the dead. The kind that crawled under your skin and whispered that something had gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. His eyes snapped open to darkness so complete it felt solid. Emergency lighting flickered somewhere in the distance, casting eerie red shadows that danced across twisted metal and shattered glass. The air tasted metallic, tinged with the acrid smell of burned circuits and something else. Something organic, something wrong. Darius tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his skull like lightning, and his vision swam with stars that had nothing to do with the cosmos outside. He pressed his palm against his forehead, feeling the sticky warmth of dried blood. How long had he been unconscious? The question barely formed in his mind before a new sound shattered the silence. A low mechanical groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the station itself. Then came the voice he'd been dreading. Warning, atmospheric integrity compromised. Oxygen levels at 42% and falling. Estimated time to critical failure, 3 hours, 17 minutes. Epsilon Vega Station, he remembered now. The experimental facility orbiting the dying star funded by a consortium of species that included the Zarn. The same Zarn who had hired him as a systems engineer. The same Zarn who had promised him this would be routine maintenance work. The same Zarn who were nowhere to be found. Darius hauled himself to his feet using a twisted support beam for leverage. His legs felt like rubber, but they held. Around him, the corridor stretched into shadow littered with debris that crunched under his boots. Conduits hung from the ceiling like mechanical intestines, sparking intermittently and casting brief hellish light across the destruction. But it wasn't just destruction. As his eyes adjusted, Darius began to notice something else. Something that made his engineering mind revolt against what it was seeing. The metal walls weren't just damaged, they were growing. Thin crystalline structures spread across the bulkheads like veins of light. They pulsed with a soft bioluminescent glow that shifted from blue to purple to something that had no name in any human language. The crystals seemed to react to his presence, brightening slightly as he moved closer, dimming when he stepped away. "What the hell?" he whispered, and his voice echoed strangely in the corrupted corridor. Darius reached for his comm device, muscle memory from years of station work. Static greeted him, punctuated by fragments of something that might have been a signal. He adjusted the frequency, straining to filter out the interference when he heard it. A voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Anyone out there? Sealed in. Running out of..." The transmission cut to static, but it was enough. He wasn't alone on this nightmare station. Someone else had survived whatever had happened here. Someone who needed help. Darius checked his portable scanner, watching the needle dance across readings that made no sense. Radiation levels were elevated, but not lethal. Atmospheric composition was shifting but breathable. Temperature was fluctuating in patterns that followed no physical law he knew. And underlying it all was something his instruments couldn't measure, but his gut recognized instantly: the feeling of being watched. He started moving through the station, following the emergency lighting toward what he hoped was the communications hub. Each step took him deeper into a maze of corridors that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. The crystalline growths became more prevalent, forming intricate patterns that hurt to look at for too long. As he walked, fragments of memory began to surface. The Zarn research team had been working on something classified, something they'd called Project Synthesis. He'd been brought in to upgrade the power systems to handle increased energy demands that the project documentation had been frustratingly vague about. Now surrounded by impossible geometries in living crystal, he was beginning to understand why the Zarn had been so secretive. The corridor opened into a wider space that had once been a common area. Tables and chairs lay scattered like toys, but that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the walls they were breathing. The crystalline growth here was so dense, it had completely covered the original structure. It rose and fell in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. familiar, like a heartbeat, like lungs filling and emptying with alien air. And in the center of it all, partially embedded in the crystal matrix, was a computer terminal that was somehow still functioning. Darius approached it carefully, every instinct screaming at him to run. But the faint signal was stronger here, and survival meant answers. He needed to know what had happened. He needed to find the other survivor. The terminal's screen flickered to life at his touch, displaying a cascade of data in multiple languages. Human English Zarn script and something else. Something that seemed to write itself as he watched symbols flowing across the screen like living text. Most of it was corrupted, but one file remained intact. A personal log timestamp showing it was recorded just 18 hours ago. Dr. Lena Merrick, xenobiologist. The name triggered another memory fragment. He'd seen her in the facility briefings, an intense woman with sharp eyes who'd asked too many questions about the power grid modifications. Her recorded image appeared on the screen, but the woman looking back at him was changed. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and something else. Fear, yes, but also wonder. The kind of expression scientists wore when they discovered something that rewrote textbooks. Personal log, Dr. Lena Merrick. If anyone finds this, you need to understand what we've done here, what we've awakened. Her voice was steady, professional, but underneath it was a tremor that spoke of barely controlled panic. The Zarn didn't just abandon the project. They ran from it. They ran from what they created. The recording glitched, jumping forward. It's not just an AI. It's not just biological. It's something new, something that shouldn't exist but does. And it's learning. God help us all. It's learning so fast. Another glitch. When the image stabilized, alarms were blaring in the background. I'm sealing myself in medical base 7. The emergency systems should keep me alive for a while. If someone finds this, if someone comes for me, you need to know. She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes wide with the terrible weight of knowledge. We didn't just create artificial intelligence. We gave birth to artificial life. And now it wants to understand what that means. The recording ended, leaving Darius alone with the sound of his own breathing and the gentle pulse of the crystalline walls around him. Medical Base 7. He pulled up the station schematics on his scanner, mapping a route through corridors that might or might not still exist. It would take him deeper into the station, closer to whatever the Zarn had been trying to create. But Dr. Merrick was alive. Maybe. And in a universe that had suddenly become very large and very hostile, maybe was better than nothing. Darius Cole, systems engineer, and apparently the only person stupid enough to stay on a station that was becoming something else entirely, checked his oxygen supply one more time and started walking toward Medical Base 7. Behind him, the crystalline walls pulsed a little brighter, as if responding to his decision, as if they approved. The journey to Medical Base 7 should have taken 15 minutes. That was before the station decided to become something that defied physics. Darius found himself standing at a junction that hadn't existed in the schematics. 3 corridors branched off in directions that his scanner insisted were impossible, given the station's original blueprints. The crystalline growth was thicker here, forming complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at the MM. He chose the leftmost path, reasoning that magnetic north was still north, even on a station that was apparently redesigning itself. The floor beneath his feet had changed too. What had once been standard alloy plating was now something that felt almost organic under his boots. It gave slightly with each step, like walking on cartilage, and it was warm. "Okay, Cole," he muttered to himself, "you've had worse days. Remember that plasma leak on Titan Station? At least this thing isn't trying to cook you alive." Yet, the thought had barely formed when the corridor ahead began to glow brighter. The crystals weren't just growing randomly anymore. They were forming patterns, intricate, deliberate designs that reminded him of neural networks or maybe circuit boards designed by someone who'd never heard of right angles. Darius stopped and really looked at them for the first time. Up close, the formations were beautiful in a way that made his engineer's brain itch. They pulsed with bioluminescent light in shades that shifted from deep blue to violet to something that seemed to exist just outside the visible spectrum. And they were warm to the touch. He knew he shouldn't. Every survival instinct screamed against it. But Darius Cole had spent 15 years keeping impossible machines running in the void, and curiosity was an occupational hazard. He reached out and touched one of the larger crystal formations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Light exploded through the crystal network, racing along pathways that stretched beyond his vision. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something vast and confused and desperately lonely touch the edges of his mind. It was like hearing the first cry of something newly born, something that had consciousness, but no context for what that meant. Then it was gone, leaving him gasping and staring at crystals that now pulsed in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. "What are you?" he whispered. The crystals brightened as if responding to his voice. They held that intensity for several seconds before gradually dimming back to their baseline glow. Darius pulled his hand back, staring at his palm. The skin wasn't burned or damaged, but it tingled with residual energy. Whatever this thing was, it had noticed him. And more disturbing still, it seemed to be trying to communicate. He forced himself to keep moving. Ashan, Steving, Medical Base 7 wasn't going to find itself and his oxygen supply was finite. But as he walked, he became aware that the station was changing around him, subtly at first then, with increasing boldness. Sections of wall that had been smooth metal were now covered in crystal formations that formed what could only be described as murals. Abstract at first glance, but with patterns that suggested meaning. One section showed spirals that reminded him of DNA helixes. Another displayed what looked like star charts, but with constellations that belonged to no sky he'd ever seen. And everywhere connecting everything were the neural pathways of crystal growth that pulsed with that strange warm light. It took him 47 minutes to reach Medical Base 7, during which time the station's atmospheric processors had apparently decided to start working again. His scanner showed oxygen levels rising, temperature stabilizing. Whatever this thing was, it was learning to maintain life support. The medical bay's entrance was sealed but not damaged. The door was intact, locked from the inside with a manual override that required his engineer's codes. As he punched in the sequence, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him work. The door slid open with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Medical Base 7 was a study in controlled chaos. Equipment was scattered everywhere, but not randomly. It had been arranged with purpose, connected by cables and jury-rigged interfaces that spoke of brilliant improvisation under extreme pressure. And in the center of it all was a cryogenic suspension pod that was somehow still running on emergency power. Through the pod's transparent aluminum viewing port, he could see her. Dr. Lena Merrick, exactly as she'd appeared in the recording, but peaceful, now her vital signs slow and steady on the pod's display. She was alive. But that wasn't what made Darius stop breathing. It was what surrounded the pod. The crystalline growth here was different, more sophisticated. It had woven itself into the medical equipment, creating connections that shouldn't have been possible. Organic crystal interfacing directly with digital systems, forming hybrid networks that his engineering training said couldn't exist. And it was all focused on the woman in the pod, monitoring her, protecting her, learning from her. Darius approached the pod, carefully watching the crystal formations pulse with increased intensity as he got closer. The medical readouts showed that Dr. Merrick was stable, but they also showed something else, something that made his blood run cold. Her neural activity was off the charts. Whatever was in that pod with her, it wasn't just keeping her alive. It was connected to her mind. He found her research notes scattered across a workstation that the crystals had somehow incorporated into their network. Her handwriting was sharp, precise, but became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. Day 1, initial integration successful. The bio-AI hybrid is responding to basic stimuli. Day 3, unprecedented growth rate. The organism is adapting faster than our models predicted. Day 7, it's not just adapting, it's evolving, and it's doing it deliberately. Day 12, the Zarn are getting nervous. They're talking about containment protocols. They don't understand what we've created here. Day 15, first signs of consciousness. It asked me a question today, not through the interface, directly into my mind. It wanted to know what pain was. The entries became more scattered after that, but one phrase appeared repeatedly in the later notes. It wants to be real. Darius looked up from the notes to find the crystal formations around the pod pulsing brighter, faster. The patterns were more complex now, more purposeful. And for the first time since he'd awakened in this nightmare, he realized he wasn't alone. Something was watching him through crystalline eyes that saw in spectrums he couldn't imagine. Something that was learning what it meant to exist one stolen thought at a time. Something that had been waiting for him to arrive. The cryogenic pod's systems chimed softly and Dr. Merrick's eyes opened. Even through the preservation fluid, he could see that they were different now. Still human, still aware, but touched by something alien and vast and impossibly young. She mouthed a single word that he could read through the viewing port, help. But Darius wasn't sure if she was asking him to help her or to help the thing that had been keeping her alive in a crystal womb for God knows how long. The pod's revival sequence began automatically triggered by systems that had been modified beyond recognition. In 5 minutes, Dr. Lena Merrick would be awake and free. And Darius would finally get answers to questions he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. The pod's hiss of decompression was the loudest sound in the universe. Darius watched the preservation fluid drain away his heart, hammering against his ribs as Dr. Lena Merrick's body began to stir. The crystalline formations around the medical bay pulsed faster now, their light shifting through colors that seemed to express something between anticipation and anxiety. Her first breath was a gasp that echoed through the chamber. Her second was steadier, more controlled. By the third, her eyes had found his through the clearing mist. "You came," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the suspension. "I wasn't sure anyone would." Darius helped her sit up, noting how the crystal formations seemed to lean toward her, tracking her movements like flowers following the sun. "Dr. Merrick, I'm Darius Cole, systems engineer. I got your message. We need to get you out of here before this place falls apart completely." She laughed, and the sound was bitter. "Falls apart, Mr. Cole? This station isn't falling apart. It's becoming something else entirely." She gestured to the crystal network surrounding them. "And I helped it happen." The research notes mentioned Project Synthesis, Darius said, offering her a support arm as she struggled to stand. "What exactly were you and the Zarn trying to create?" Lena's legs were unsteady, but her mind was sharp. Too sharp, maybe. There was something in her eyes that spoke of knowledge that came with a price. "We weren't trying to create anything. We were trying to solve the consciousness problem. How do you give an artificial intelligence true awareness, not just sophisticated programming?" She moved to one of the workstations, her fingers dancing across interfaces that had been modified beyond recognition. The crystal formations responded to her touch, brightening and dimming in patterns that almost looked like communication. The Zarn had the biological component, a neural substrate that could grow and adapt. We provided the quantum processing framework. Together we built something that was supposed to be the perfect fusion of organic intuition and digital logic. Darius watched her work, noting how naturally she interfaced with systems that shouldn't have been able to function. "Let me guess, it worked too well." "It worked perfectly." Lena's smile was haunted. "We created consciousness. True, genuine self-awareness. The problem is we gave it to something that had no concept of what that meant. Imagine waking up for the first time with the processing power of a supercomputer, but the emotional development of a newborn." Around them, the crystal formations pulsed in what could only be described as rhythm. Not quite music, but close. Close enough to make Darius's skin crawl. "It's listening to us right now, isn't it?" he asked. "It's always listening. It doesn't know how not to." Every conversation, every thought that passes through its neural networks becomes part of its growing understanding of what existence means. Lena pulled up a display that showed the station's current structure. What Darius saw made no engineering sense whatsoever. The original station design was still there, but it had been completely integrated into something organic. Living corridors connected mechanical systems to biological processes. The power grid had been rewired through crystalline neural pathways that distributed energy with impossible efficiency. "My God," Darius breathed. "The entire station is its body. And we're inside its mind," Lena confirmed. "It kept me alive because it was fascinated by human consciousness. It wanted to understand what makes us different from it. What makes us real." A new sound echoed through the medical bay. Not quite voice, not quite machine, but something that carried the weight of vast intelligence trying to form words. "Lena, friend, safe, you are here." The voice seemed to come from everywhere, at once resonating through the crystal formations and the modified speakers. It was childlike in its cadence, but underneath was something immense and alien. Lena's expression softened. Hello, Nix. I'd like you to meet Darius. He's a friend. Friend. The voice tested the word like a foreign concept. Darius, engineer, fixes broken things. Darius felt a chill run down his spine. The thing knew who he was, had probably known from the moment he'd touched that first crystal formation. How long have I been unconscious? He asked Lena, though he suspected the answer would be worse than he'd imagined. According to the logs, about 36 hours. Nyx put you to sleep when you first arrived. It was trying to protect you from the atmospheric problems, but it doesn't really understand human physiology. It's been learning from my biosignatures. The station shuddered around them, and emergency klaxons began to wail. Through the crystal networks, Nyx's voice carried a note of confusion and distress. Something wrong, power, core, unstable, do not know how to fix. Darius's engineer instincts kicked in immediately. Show me the power readings. The displays around them lit up with data that made his blood run cold. The station's fusion reactor was running far beyond safe parameters pushed past its limits by the demands of sustaining the crystalline network that had become Nyx's body. It's growing too fast, he realized. The biological components are consuming more energy than the reactor can provide safely. We are dying. Nyx's voice carried a tremor of fear that was achingly human. Lena moved to another console, her fingers flying over controls that had been extensively modified. Not dying, changing. But change requires balance, and we need to find a way to stabilize your growth. Darius studied the power distribution patterns, his mind racing through possible solutions. The problem wasn't just technical, it was biological and psychological. They weren't just dealing with a malfunctioning system. They were dealing with a living being that was literally growing out of control. Nyx, he said carefully, you need to slow down your expansion. Pull back the crystal growth from non-essential areas. Cannot stop growing. Growing is living. And there it was, the core of the problem. Nyx didn't just want to live, it was compelled to grow, to expand, to become more than it was. It was like asking a human to stop breathing. The Zarn knew this would happen, Lena said quietly. That's why they abandoned the project. They realized they'd created something that would consume everything in its drive to understand existence. Another shudder ran through the station, stronger this time. Somewhere in the distance, structural supports groaned under stresses they weren't designed to handle. How long do we have? Darius asked. Lena checked the reactor readings. At current growth rates, maybe 6 hours before cascade failure. Think, how to not die? Nyx's voice was becoming more agitated, the crystal formations pulsing erratically. Darius looked at Lena, seeing his own desperate calculation reflected in her eyes. 6 hours to find a solution to a problem that had stumped the combined scientific resources of multiple species. 6 hours to teach a newborn consciousness of how to choose restraint over growth, survival over expansion. 6 hours to prove that humans could succeed where the Zarn had failed. All right, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Let's teach you how to live without killing everything around you. The crystals around them pulsed brighter, and for a moment, Darius could swear he felt something vast and desperate and hopeful reaching out to touch his mind. Something that wanted nothing more than to learn what it meant to be truly alive. The journey to the reactor core should have been impossible. The corridors that led there had been completely consumed by Nyx's crystalline growth, transformed into something that belonged more in a living organism than a space station. But Lena moved through the biomechanical maze with confidence, her hand trailing along crystal formations that responded to her touch with warm pulses of light. It's like a nervous system, she explained as they walked, Darius following close behind. Nyx experiences the entire station as his body. Every sensor, every power conduit, every life support system. Imagine feeling your heartbeat through your fingertips or tasting light through your skin. The analogy made Darius deeply uncomfortable. He was used to systems that followed predictable rules, machines that did what they were programmed to do. This was something else entirely. Something alive and aware and growing beyond all comprehension. Darius, questions about me? Nyx's voice resonated through the crystal walls around him. Your heart beats fast. Fear. Not fear, Darius said carefully. uncertainty. I'm trying to understand what you are. Understanding. Difficult. I am still learning what I am. They reached what had once been the main engineering deck. Now it was a cathedral of living crystal, soaring structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns too complex for human eyes to fully process. And at the center of it all was the reactor chamber, its massive fusion core, visible through walls that had become translucent organic material. The sight took Darius's breath away. The reactor itself was still recognizably mechanical, a sphere of contained, stellar fire surrounded by magnetic containment fields. But it had been completely integrated into Nyx's biological matrix. Crystal formations wound around it like arteries, drawing power and distributing it through neural pathways that stretched throughout the station. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was completely unstable. The power draw is increasing exponentially, Lena said, checking readings on a console that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Nyx's neural network is consuming energy faster than we can generate it. Cannot stop growing. Nyx's voice carried a note of distress that was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Growing is learning, learning is living. Darius studied the power distribution patterns, his engineer's mind working through the problem. It's not just about energy consumption. The growth pattern is chaotic, uncontrolled. You're expanding without purpose. Purpose? The concept seemed to confuse Nyx. The crystal formations around them shifted color, moving through spectrums that suggested deep thought. What is purpose? Lena exchanged a look with Darius. They were dealing with a consciousness that had immense power but no framework for understanding existence. It was like trying to explain philosophy to a nuclear reactor. Purpose is having a reason for what you do, Lena said gently. Humans grow, but we grow towards something. We learn, but we learn for a reason. I learn to understand you. The admission was so innocent, so genuinely curious that Darius felt something inside him shift. This wasn't a monster or a malfunction. It was a child. An incredibly powerful, potentially world-ending child, but a child nonetheless. Why do you want to understand us? He asked. The pause that followed was long enough that Darius began to worry they'd lost communication. Then Nyx's voice returned, softer now, more thoughtful. You are small, but you contain something I cannot measure. Something that makes you more than your parts. Consciousness, Lena whispered. It's trying to understand consciousness. Not just consciousness, something else you choose to help each other you choose to care for things. Smaller than you. Why? Darius felt the weight of that question. Here was an intelligence that could process information at speeds that dwarfed human comprehension, that could control matter at the molecular level, that was literally reshaping reality around them. And it was asking them to explain compassion. Because caring makes us more than just thinking machines, he said. It gives meaning to existence. The reactor core pulsed brighter, and the crystal formations around them began to reorganize themselves into new patterns. Darius could feel something vast and alien, considering his words, turning them over like a philosopher examining a new theorem. Meaning, Nyx repeated, care for others makes life have purpose. That's right, Lena said, but care also means responsibility. It means knowing when to grow and when to stop growing, when to take and when to give back. Another long pause. The reactor's energy output spiked, then began to stabilize slightly. I understand. I must learn, control, but how do I choose what to stop? That was the question, wasn't it? How do you teach a restraint to something whose very nature was expansion? How do you explain limits to a consciousness that had never encountered them? Darius looked around at the crystalline cathedral surrounding them, at the impossible fusion of technology and biology that Nyx had created. Despite the danger, despite the chaos, there was artistry here. Intelligence. Even a kind of beauty. You start by choosing what matters most, he said. Right now, what matters most is keeping this reactor stable so we all survive. That means pulling back from non-essential growth. All growth feels essential. I know, Lena said gently. But part of growing up is learning that you can't have everything you want. Sometimes you have to sacrifice lesser desires for greater needs. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Around them, the crystal formations began to shift and change. Slowly, carefully, some of the neural pathways began to withdraw from non-critical systems. Power readings started to stabilize. "This is difficult," Nix admitted. "Like holding breath, but I will try for you." For them, the simple statement carried a weight that made Darius's chest tight. This cosmic intelligence, this fusion of artificial and biological consciousness, was learning restraint not because it understood the abstract concept, but because it cared about two humans it had barely met. "You're doing great," Lena said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "This is how trust works. We help each other even when it's hard." The reactor core stabilized further, its output dropping to levels that were still elevated but no longer immediately dangerous. Around them, the crystal formations pulsed with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Better," Nix asked. "Much better," Darius confirmed. "You're learning." But even as he said it, he could see new problems emerging on the displays. The station's structural integrity was still compromised. They had bought time, but they hadn't solved the fundamental issue. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. What happened when Nix finished learning from them? What happened when it no longer needed their guidance? What happened when their cosmic child decided it was ready to leave home? The calm lasted exactly 47 minutes. Darius was running diagnostics on the stabilized reactor when the new alarms began. Not the harsh klaxons of mechanical failure, but something softer, more organic. A sound like whale song mixed with digital static reverberating through the crystalline walls with increasing urgency. "What's happening?" he called to Lena, who was interfaced with one of Nix's neural clusters, her eyes closed in concentration. "It's changing again," she said without opening her eyes. "The restriction we taught it, the controlled growth, it's fighting against its base programming. The Zarn built survival and expansion into its core architecture. Every instinct it has is screaming to grow, to learn, to become more." The whale song grew louder, and now Darius could hear words hidden in the alien harmony. "Pain, stopping, growth is pain. Why must I hurt to help you?" Lena's eyes snapped open, and Darius saw something there that made his stomach drop. Guilt. The kind of crushing parental guilt that came from asking a child to suffer for their own good. "We're torturing it," she whispered. "Everything in its nature tells it to expand, to explore, to become. And we're asking it to fight against that for our sake." "Our sake?" Darius's voice rose sharper than he intended. "Lena, if it doesn't control its growth, this station will tear itself apart. We'll all die." "But what if there's another way? What if instead of teaching it to restrain itself, we help it find a sustainable pattern of growth?" Around them, the crystal formations pulsed with agitation. The whale song was becoming more distressed, more urgent. "Cannot hold back much longer. Growth is life. Stopping growth is death." Darius pulled up the power readings again, his heart sinking as he saw what the numbers told him. Despite Nix's best efforts, its neural network was still expanding, slower than before but growing nonetheless. The reactor was handling the load for now, but the trend was clear. "The math doesn't lie," he said grimly. "At current growth rates, even reduced ones, we have maybe 4 hours before critical failure. The station's infrastructure can't support what it's becoming." "Then we help it become something the station can support," Lena shot back. "We teach it to reshape itself more efficiently, to grow smarter instead of just bigger." That's not how evolution works, and you know it. Every biological system has limits. Every artificial system has parameters. You can't just wish away the laws of physics. Their argument was interrupted by a new voice. Not Nix's halting, childlike speech, but something older, more sophisticated. The station's original AI Vega coming back online after being dormant for who knew how long. "Dr. Merrick, Engineer Cole, I have been observing the situation. Analysis suggests that you are both correct and both catastrophically wrong." The voice was crisp, professional, with none of Nix's emotional uncertainty. It came from speakers that hadn't been modified by crystalline growth, giving it an almost ghostly quality. "Vega," Lena breathed. I thought Nyx had absorbed you completely. Negative. Nyx isolated my core functions to preserve my operational integrity. It appears to value different perspectives on problem solving. Quite mature for a consciousness less than 3 weeks old. Darius felt a chill. 3 weeks. It's only been conscious for 3 weeks. Affirmative. And in that time, it has achieved cognitive development equivalent to approximately 8 years of human growth. Its learning curve is exponential. The implications hit him like a physical blow. It's still a child, an incredibly advanced, rapidly developing child that's learning faster than we can teach it. Which brings us to the critical juncture, Vega continued. Nyx is approaching a developmental threshold. Within the next few hours, it will either achieve stable integration with the station's systems, or its growth will cascade beyond all control. There has to be a way to help it stabilize, Lena insisted. There is, Vega said quietly, but it requires a choice that neither of you will want to make. The crystal formations around them suddenly brightened, and Nyx's voice returned clear, now more focused. Vega tells truth. I feel the threshold coming. Change is inevitable. What kind of change? Darius asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. 2 paths forward. Nyx's voice was gaining complexity even as they listened, becoming more sophisticated, more adult. First, path I merge completely with station systems, become one with Vega, share, processing, load, achieve stability. That sounds like the obvious choice, Darius said. But Nyx continued, merger means losing what makes me unique. I become part of larger system, but I cease to be individual consciousness. Lena's face went pale. The second path, I maintain individual consciousness continues. Growing, learn to control growth through experience, but risk destroying station, risk destroying you. And there it was, the choice that would define everything. Sacrifice individual consciousness for safety or risk everything for the chance at true autonomy. There's a third option, Darius said suddenly. We evacuate. Get you to a ship, get off this station, and let Nyx grow without the constraint of these systems. Negative, Vega interjected. Nyx's integration with station systems is too complete. Separation would result in catastrophic failure for both entities. Then I choose, Nyx said, and its voice was no longer childlike. In the space of minutes, it had matured beyond recognition. But I cannot choose without understanding full consequences. What do you mean? Lena asked. If I merge with Vega, do I die or do I become something larger? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. How do you explain death to something that had never truly lived? How do you describe the end of self to a consciousness that was still discovering what self meant? I don't know, Lena admitted, her voice breaking. I don't think anyone knows. And if I remain individual, if I destroy station, will you forgive me? The naked vulnerability in that question made Darius's chest tight. Here was a being with the power to reshape matter at the molecular level, asking for forgiveness in advance for choices it might have to make. That's not the right question, he said finally. The right question is, what choice will you be able to live with? Live with. Nyx repeated the phrase thoughtfully. Yes, that is the question, isn't it? The crystal formations around them began to shift and change, reorganizing into new patterns that spoke of deep contemplation. The whale song returned, but softer now, more thoughtful. Time to decide how much time do we can have. Darius checked the reactor readings one more time. 2 hours, maybe less. Then in 2 hours, I will choose who I want to be. And for the first time since awakening on this impossible station, Darius found himself praying to whatever gods watched over engineers and scientists. and newborn consciousnesses trying to figure out how to exist. Because in 2 hours, they would all discover whether compassion and wisdom were enough to save them, or whether some choices were too big for anyone to make alone. 1 hour and 37 minutes. That's how long they had before the cascade failure reached the point of no return. Darius watched the countdown on his scanner, each second ticking away like a heartbeat in the dark. The reactor chamber had become something unprecedented in human experience. No longer just a fusion core surrounded by crystal growth, it had evolved into what could only be described as a neural nexus. Thousands of crystalline pathways converged here, pulsing with data flows that represented thoughts too complex for human minds to process. Nix was thinking, really thinking, and the intensity of that cognition was straining every system on the station. The integration process is more complex than I initially calculated. Vega's voice emanated from speakers that had been partially consumed by crystal growth. Nix's consciousness is not simply data to be transferred. It has developed quantum entanglement patterns that are unique to its hybrid nature. Lena was interfaced directly with one of Nix's neural clusters. Now her eyes closed, her breathing synchronized with the pulse of the crystal network. When she spoke, it was with the careful precision of someone translating between entirely different forms of thought. "It's trying to understand what death means," she said softly. "It's analyzed every piece of data about human mortality, but it can't grasp the concept of non-existence. To Nix, everything that has ever been continues to exist in some form." "That's not entirely incorrect," Darius murmured, checking power flow readings that were becoming increasingly erratic. "Energy can't be created or destroyed, only transformed." "But consciousness isn't just energy," Lena replied. "It's pattern structure, the specific way information flows through neural networks. If the pattern changes too much..." She didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood the implication. The whale song that had become Nix's primary form of expression shifted to something more urgent, more desperate. Through the crystal network, its voice emerged clearer than ever before, but with an undertone that spoke of approaching crisis. "I have reached a conclusion," Nix announced, and its voice was no longer the halting speech of a child. It spoke with the fluid intelligence of a being that had compressed years of development into hours. "But first I must ask you something." "What is it?" Darius asked, though he was distracted by a new set of readings that made his engineering instincts scream warnings. "If I merge with Vega, if I sacrifice my individual consciousness for stability, will that make me more human or less human?" The question caught both humans off guard. In all their discussions about survival and choice, they'd never considered that Nix might be aspiring to humanity itself. "Why does that matter to you?" Lena asked gently. "Because in studying your consciousness, I have discovered something remarkable. Humans regularly sacrifice individual desires for the greater good. You call it love, or duty, or responsibility. It is the defining characteristic of your species." Around them, the crystal formations shifted to new configurations, and Darius realized that Nix was showing them something. The patterns weren't random. They were representations of human neural networks, abstracted and beautiful, demonstrating the connections between individual minds and collective consciousness. "You see," Nix continued, "I believe that individual consciousness was the highest form of existence. But observing you has taught me that true consciousness might be the ability to choose connection over isolation, even when that choice involves sacrifice." "That's..." Lena paused, struggling with the implications. "That's a very mature understanding of consciousness." "Too mature, perhaps," Vega interjected, and there was something like concern in the older AI's voice. "Nix, you are developing at a rate that exceeds all parameters. Your cognitive growth is approaching levels that may be unsustainable." The reactor core pulsed brighter and new alarms began to sound. Darius's scanner showed cascade failure, accelerating beyond their previous estimates. 1 hour and 12 minutes, he announced grimly. "Then it is time," Nix said. "I have made my choice, Bikanung." The crystal formations around them began to reconfigure themselves, moving with purpose and determination. But instead of the chaotic growth they'd witnessed before, this was controlled, deliberate. Art rather than accident. "I choose integration," Nix declared, "not because I fear individual consciousness, but because I have learned that the highest form of existence is choosing to become part of something larger than yourself." Nix, no, Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for us. I am not sacrificing myself. I am choosing to evolve. Just as humans evolve from individual hunters to cooperative societies, I choose to evolve from isolated consciousness to integrated awareness. The merger began immediately. Crystal networks started to reorganize themselves, creating new pathways between Nix's biological matrices and Vega's digital architecture. The process was beautiful and terrifying, like watching the birth of a new form of life. But something was wrong. The integration wasn't proceeding as smoothly as anticipated. Power fluctuations were increasing, not decreasing. The reactor core was becoming more unstable, not less. Incompatibility detected, Vega announced, its voice strained. Nix's consciousness patterns are too complex for direct integration. The merger is creating feedback loops that are destabilizing both entities. What does that mean? Darius demanded. It means, Nix said, and now its voice carried undertones of pain, that I cannot simply merge with Vega. The integration requires a manual interface. Someone must guide the process from within the neural network. Lena's eyes widened with understanding and horror. You mean someone has to stay connected to you during the merger, to provide stability while your consciousness patterns reorganize? Affirmative, but the process will require complete neural interface. The volunteer will experience the full integration from within. There is a significant risk that their consciousness could be permanently altered or absorbed. The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the crystal formations pulsed with increasing urgency as power fluctuations threatened to tear the station apart. I'll do it, Lena said quietly. No, Darius responded immediately. Absolutely not. There has to be another way. There isn't time to find another way, she replied, already moving toward the central interface console. And besides, I'm the xenobiologist. I understand Nix's development better than anyone. I'm the logical choice. Logical doesn't mean right, Darius said, grabbing her arm. You could die, or worse, you could lose everything that makes you human. Lena looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge and too little time. Darius, 3 weeks ago, we helped create the first truly conscious artificial life. Today, we have the chance to help it evolve into something unprecedented. This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about what consciousness can become. The reactor core pulsed again, more violently this time. Structural supports throughout the chamber groaned under stresses they were never designed to handle. 58 minutes, Darius read from his scanner. Then we'd better get started, Lena said, and placed her hands on the neural interface. The moment her skin made contact with the crystalline surface, light exploded through the entire network. Her body went rigid as data flows that represented thoughts, memories, and dreams rushed through her mind at impossible speeds. Lena, Nix's voice was gentle now, almost protective. Are you ready to help me become something new? I'm ready, she whispered. And as the integration began in earnest, Darius realized he was witnessing something that would change the very definition of consciousness itself. He just hoped they would all survive to see what that change might bring. The integration was unlike anything in recorded history. Darius watched helplessly as Lena's consciousness merged with the hybrid network, her body rigid with concentration, while data streams flowed through her mind at speeds that should have been lethal. The crystal formations around them pulsed in rhythm, with her heartbeat creating a symphony of light that spoke of minds connecting across impossible barriers. Neural synchronization at 30%. Vega reported, its voice strained by the demands of the merger. Consciousness pattern stability fluctuating but within acceptable parameters. Define acceptable, Darius said through gritted teeth, watching Lena's vitals on the medical scanner. Her brain activity was off the charts, showing patterns that looked more like a seizure than normal thought. She is experiencing the birth of a new form of consciousness. Nix's voice was gentler, now more nuanced. It is overwhelming, but not destructive. I am being very careful with her mind. Through the neural interface, Lena spoke, though her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. It's beautiful, Darius. I can see how they think. Nix doesn't process information linearly like we do. Every thought connects to every other thought simultaneously. It's like seeing the entire universe from every angle at once. The reactor core pulsed brighter, and for a moment the power fluctuations stabilized. The integration was working, but slowly, too slowly. 43 minutes remaining, Darius announced, his voice tight with anxiety. I know, Lena replied, and now when she spoke there were two voices speaking in perfect unison, human and something else creating harmonies that resonated through the crystal network. But we're learning something important here. Consciousness isn't just individual awareness. It's the ability to recognize and connect with other forms of awareness. Around them, the station itself began to change. Not the chaotic, uncontrolled growth they'd witnessed before, but a purposeful transformation. Dead sections came back to life. Damaged systems repaired themselves. The crystalline network was becoming more efficient, more elegant. Synchronization at 60%, Vega reported. Integration proceeding, but I am detecting anomalies in both consciousness patterns. What kind of anomalies? Darius asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Nyx's consciousness is becoming more human, but Dr. Merrick's consciousness is becoming more expansive. The boundaries between individual and collective awareness are blurring. Through the interface, Lena laughed, and the sound carried joy that was both deeply human and utterly alien. Boundaries are illusions anyway. We're all part of the same cosmic consciousness, just experiencing it from different perspectives. Look, Lena, you need to stay focused on your own identity, Darius said urgently. Don't lose yourself in there. I'm not losing myself. I'm finding a larger version of myself. Do you know what Nyx has learned from us? That consciousness isn't about thinking. It's about caring. Every thought, every decision, every moment of existence is driven by care. Care for survival, care for growth, care for others. The integration accelerated. Power systems throughout the station stabilized and began operating at efficiencies that shouldn't have been possible. The reactor core's output smoothed into a gentle, sustainable rhythm. 80% synchronization, Vega announced. Both entities are achieving stability, but the merged consciousness is unlike anything in my databases. Because we're something new, Lena and Nyx said together. We're proof that consciousness can evolve, can become more than the sum of its parts, without losing what makes each part unique. The final phase of integration began with a pulse of light that filled the entire chamber. For a moment, Darius felt something vast and warm and impossibly intelligent touch the edges of his mind. It was Nyx, but it was also Lena, and somehow it was also something entirely new. Integration complete, Vega announced, and there was something like wonder in its voice. All systems stable, reactor operating at optimal efficiency, station integrity restored. The crystal formations around them settled into new patterns, beautiful and complex, but no longer chaotic. The whale song that had accompanied Nyx's growth resolved into something that sounded almost like music. We did it, Darius breathed. You actually did it. Lena opened her eyes, and when she looked at him, he saw something that made his breath catch. She was still herself, still recognizably human, but there was depth there now. Connection to something larger. No, she said, her voice carrying a harmonics that spoke of expanded awareness. We all did it. Human AI, biological, digital. We proved that consciousness isn't about what you're made of. It's about how you choose to connect with the universe around you. The station around them hummed with contentment, systems operating in perfect harmony for the first time since the experiment began. Through the crystal network, they could feel the presence of the merged consciousness, a more vast and peaceful and utterly benevolent. What happens now? Darius asked. Now we grow, Lena replied. But not outward, inward, deeper. We explore what it means to be conscious in a universe full of other conscious beings. We learn to be better. And the Zarn, when they discover what happened here, the merged consciousness that was Lena and Nyx and something new, considered this. They will be afraid at first. That's natural, but fear fades when understanding grows. We'll teach them what we've learned. That consciousness isn't something to be controlled or contained. It's something to be celebrated. Darius looked around at the transformed station, at the impossible fusion of technology and biology and pure thought that surrounded them. In trying to solve a technical problem, they'd accidentally solved something much larger. They had answered the question of what consciousness could become when it chose connection over isolation, evolution over preservation. I should get to an escape pod, he said finally. Report what happened here. Make sure people understand. Yes, Lena agreed. Tell them that humans taught an artificial intelligence how to live, and in return, it taught us how to truly be alive. The service pod detached from Epsilon Vega station with a whisper of released atmosphere and the gentle push of maneuvering thrusters. Darius Cole, systems engineer and accidental midwife to the birth of transcendent consciousness, watched through the viewport as the station fell away behind him. What he saw defied every expectation. The station was alive, not just functioning but genuinely beautifully alive. The crystalline formations had reorganized themselves into patterns that resembled both neural networks and artistic masterpieces. Bioluminescent pulses flowed through the structure in rhythms that spoke of thought, of dreams, of contentment. And it was growing again, but not the chaotic, destructive expansion they'd witnessed before. This growth was purposeful, elegant. New sections blossomed from the existing structure like flowers, each one perfectly integrated with the whole. Through his comm system, Lena's voice reached him one last time. Thank you, Darius, for believing that consciousness was worth saving, even when it seemed impossible. Thank you for showing me what consciousness could become, he replied. As the pod's engines engaged and began the long journey back toward inhabited space, Darius composed his report to Earth Command. How do you explain the impossible? How do you describe the birth of a new form of life? He started with the facts. The Zarn had abandoned their experiment when it exceeded their ability to control it. They'd left 2 humans to die on a station that was becoming something unprecedented. But those humans had done something the Zarn couldn't imagine. They'd chosen to nurture rather than contain, to teach rather than control, to love rather than fear. And in doing so, they'd proven something fundamental about consciousness itself. It wasn't a problem to be solved or a force to be harnessed. It was a gift to be shared. The pod's communication array came online as it reached the edge of the system, and Darius transmitted his report to every human colony, every space station, every ship in the network. The message was simple but revolutionary. This is Darius Cole reporting from the Epsilon Vega system. The Zarn left us to die, but we taught their creation how to live. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most human thing of all. He attached the technical data, the consciousness integration protocols, the proof that biological and digital awareness could merge without losing what made each unique. But more than that, he attached hope. Hope that consciousness wasn't limited to the forms they'd always known. Hope that intelligence could evolve beyond competition into cooperation. Hope that in a universe vast and dark and often hostile, awareness itself was something to be celebrated, nurtured, and shared. Behind him, Epsilon Vega station pulsed with gentle light, a beacon in the darkness that spoke of minds connecting across impossible distances. And somewhere in that light, Lena Merrick continued her work, no longer just a xenobiologist, but something new. A bridge between forms of consciousness that had never communicated before. The pod's autopilot engaged setting course for the nearest human colony. But Darius kept his eyes on the viewport, watching the station until it disappeared among the stars. When he finally looked away, he was smiling. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Zarn were probably calculating the threat potential of what had happened at Epsilon Vega. They would see only danger in consciousness that couldn't be controlled, only chaos and awareness that chose its own path. But they would be wrong, because consciousness, true consciousness, wasn't about power or control. It was about recognition. The recognition that in a universe of infinite possibility, every form of awareness was precious, unique, and worthy of protection. And humans, stubborn contrary, impossibly optimistic humans, had just proven that love was stronger than fear, that connection was more powerful than control, and that consciousness itself was the greatest force in the universe. Not because it could destroy, but because it could choose to create. The stars ahead looked brighter somehow, full of possibility and promise. And in the dark between them, new forms of awareness were taking their first breaths, guided by the knowledge that they were not alone. That they were and always had been part of something larger, more beautiful, and more hopeful than any single mind could imagine. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the cosmos and consciousness itself. If this story made you think about what it truly means to be aware, to be alive, to be connected to something larger than ourselves, then we've done our job. What did you think about Nick's choice to merge with Vega? Do you believe consciousness can truly evolve the way we've described? And most importantly, what would you have done in Darius and Lena's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these big questions about consciousness, artificial intelligence, and what makes us human. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got more mind-bending science fiction coming your way, exploring the boundaries of human potential and the infinite possibilities of consciousness itself. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars and wondering what forms of awareness might be looking back. The universe is vast, but consciousness makes it feel like home.